Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to Women at NJPAC's special virtual event, Pioneers of Protest, celebrating 100 years of women's voting. Women have always had a seat at the table at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, something that was demanded by our 9 founders more than 25 years ago. Today, we are a dynamic community of women who represent the diversity and passion of our state and who are committed to celebrating the transformational role women play in our communities. I welcome you on behalf of our Women at NJPAC trustees and members and our 12 partner organizations who collaborated with us on this event. Tonight, we mark 100 years since women won the right to vote, a fight that took place over 3 generations. New Jersey's own Alice Paul led the fight over the last 10 years and pioneered disruptive and very unladylike tactics, including parades, protests, and picketing that ultimately brought about the largest expansion of voting rights in American history. We know that the 19th Amendment was not an end, but just the beginning of achieving voting rights for all. Because of voter suppression, Black women and many Black men did not fully get the vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Indeed, the fight for voting rights and citizenship rights, and yes, women's rights, continues today. Tonight's panel will discuss the impact of women's political empowerment. We'll celebrate our ancestors' enduring resistance, spirit of resistance, and affirm how vital it is that all citizens vote in November's election. If you have questions during the event, please use the Q&A function to submit. Before we introduce our panel, I'm grateful that we are joined tonight by the Mayor of the City of Newark, Mayor Ross J. Baraka, and Newark's Council President Mildred C. Crump. In 1994, Mildred became the first African-American woman elected to the City Council, and in 2006 became the first woman to be named Council President. She was the inspiration for us to plan tonight's event. Mayor Baraka, thank you for joining us, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Sahar. First, I just want to say thank you to Women at NJPAC and our leader here, Councilwoman Mildred Crump, the Council President, who is doing an awesome job, always has, for having the foresight to bring this incredible group of women together to talk about something incredibly important, which is a women's suffrage movement, or women's opportunity and right and engagement in voting. When I think about women voters and the fight for women's equality and voting in this country, I think of people like Sojourner Truth, like Ella Baker, like Shirley Chisholm and Fannie Lou Hamer. These are great women that I grew up listening to my father and mother talk about and read about that affected this country in an incredible way. This is a timely discussion, given that Biden has had the wisdom to choose Senator Kamala Harris as his vice presidential candidate in this election coming up. I think that this is an incredible moment in history for women in general, but women of color in particular at this time. And I think it's well-deserved and you know, should have happened a long time ago. We're so grateful that it's happening now. I know this is going to be an awesome discussion with the high-powered panel that you have. So looking forward to it. And thank you, Councilwoman Crump and Women of NJPAC for having the fortitude and the foresight to make this happen today. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor. If I have to follow a male in this particular venue, I'm glad it's my mayor, the best mayor in America. First, let me thank Sarah and Marcia, 2 of the most dynamic women that I know. I constantly strive to be like you and to accomplish as you do. You make it look easy, but I know that it is because you have the will and the spirit and the desire to see that women are given their fair chance in America. Right now, we're focusing on the right to vote. And when I think back over the years to my grandmother, who wanted to vote but could not vote because she lived in the South, and that was not permitted. But as I grew, and my sisters, and those in my family, as we grew to adults, she literally made us promise that we would never forget what the gift to vote was. And so I thank you so much again for everyone who has taken time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. Hopefully, we're going to be able to answer some questions and provide some solutions. So onward and upward, Sarah. As they say, let's go.
Thank you, Madam Council President Crump. It was your incredible vision and inspiration that led us to put this event together. Now to our panel. We are thrilled to welcome 4 groundbreaking women leaders from the great state of New Jersey tonight. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who represents the 12th Congressional District, was the first African-American woman to serve Congress from New Jersey. Congresswoman Watson Coleman is also the founder of the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, a former Navy helicopter pilot who represents the 11th Congressional District, is serving in her freshman year after being elected in 2018. The Honorable Tahisha Way, New Jersey's Secretary of State and New Jersey's top election official, is responsible for overseeing the state of New Jersey's Division of Elections and ensuring broad and fair access to the right to vote. And Governor Christie Todd Whitman, who was the first woman governor of New Jersey, served from 1994 to 2001. Governor Whitman then served in the cabinet of President George W. Bush as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And I am so pleased that our moderator for the evening is Sahar Aziz, a law professor and the Chancellor's Social Justice Scholar at Rutgers University Law School. She is the founding director of the interdisciplinary Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and is also currently a candidate for the Board of Education in Westfield. So Sahar, take it away. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. What a tremendous honor and privilege it is today to moderate this phenomenal panel. You know, since arriving in New Jersey 3 years ago to join the Rutgers Law faculty in Newark, I have been continuously impressed by the people, the youth, the women, and the leaders of this diverse and energetic state. And so today we are so fortunate to have 4 remarkable New Jersey women leaders with us. And I'm very fortunate and I feel very privileged to moderate this really important panel. So we're going to frame our questions around 3 themes, and I'll give each panelist an opportunity to speak on those themes. And those 3 themes are going to be the impact of voting or not voting on women, the intersection of race and class as they affect women and voting in the past and in the present, and then finally, the insider and outsider strategies for activism and reform and change. So I will start with the first theme, how voting, right, impacts women, or the failure to vote impacts women. And I'd like to start with a question for Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. What do you think is the most significant impediment to women's political empowerment in American society? And how does that connect to voting and the right to vote?
Well, first of all, thank you. I want to thank Nina Wells for reaching out to me and asking me to be a part of this. And I'm so delighted to see my colleague, Mikey Sherrill. We don't get to see each other's face anymore. And of course, the secretary and of course, the governor. Just good to be here with you all. I think that that's an interesting question right now, because as I think of the impact of the woman's activism since most recently, since the beginning of the current administration's administration, how the coming together, the organizing of women slowed the ACA repeal that was hot on the priority list for the new administration. So when I think of impediments, I think of the obstacles that those who are in power try to throw up in our way, whether or not it is, this whole issue with voting by mail, this whole issue of supporting the post office, depending upon whether or not you're a woman of color or not, other ways to suppress the vote. The fact that we're still fighting for equal pay for equal work, that we find ourselves as single women, a lot of times head of households, having to take care of the home so much that we weren't getting so much involved in the community and the things that we thought were important. But at some point, that changed. And so we're at a different juncture right now. And I don't know that there is any impediment specifically created that will stop us from doing what we want to do. I mean, if you see what's happening in Congress, the number of women that have gotten elected to Congress like never before. If you look at the women governors, I mean, there was a time when I suspect our governor was the only woman at the conference. And I know what that feels like, being African-American women in certain positions. If you look at just the elected officials, and if you look at those who have become the organizers of the movements, whether or not it's the Black Lives Movement, the hashtag Me Too movement, women have come into their own, whether or not it's fighting every day for gun safety laws in our country. Women have come into their own, and things are changing because of it. And so while there may have been, maybe we weren't invited to the table, and maybe people still aren't that comfortable with our being at that table, but we brought the chair when we had to. We're there now. And so, I mean, we've got Nancy Pelosi. It's probably one of the, if not the most powerful person, I believe, in the United States of America right now, is a woman. And those obstacles that were put in our way, those impediments, those socializations that were inculcated in us that cause us not to be as involved or as connected, they don't exist anymore. So this is a new day, and we're finding a way to make sure that our voices are heard. And it's important that our voices are heard on every issue, because we're concerned about every aspect of life, from our families to our larger communities.
Amen. I know we have a lot of young women on this webinar, and I'm so glad that you said that, and that's exactly what I hope they will hear, so that they'll continue to pay it forward. So my next question is for Secretary Tahisha Way. So due to our polarized national political environment today, for better or worse, and we're not going to go into why, but I think most people agree that it is a highly polarized political environment in the United States. There's likely to be significant interest in the presidential elections this year, and hopefully that'll turn into high voter turnout. But from your vantage point as the Secretary of State for New Jersey, which includes jurisdiction over elections, what do you believe are the most important voting-related issues? And what are the factors that tend to increase voter registration and voter turnout in New Jersey?
Well, thank you, Sahar. And I also want to thank NJPAC Women's Group for hosting this very informative and important event. And of course, the esteemed panelists. It's such an honor to be with you all. Now, for me, we all understand that this is an unusual election, and we hope that the voting issue for women and all voters, and I'm just going to speak to this issue this evening, that we should all be caring about most is voter access. We definitely want to make sure that every eligible voter can participate in free, fair, and safe elections. And at the same time, to have this access, all of us must be informed voters. So, Sahar, if I may take a few moments and just speak about the conduct of this upcoming election that is again going to be conducted in a hybrid fashion, so that everyone has an awareness that every eligible active voter will be sent a vote by mail ballot by the first week of October. And what voters should do right now is go to the Am I Registered tool on my Division of Elections website to check their voter registration status early. So they'll have time to fix anything if it's incorrect. And then if it is the second week in October and your ballot hasn't arrived, I humbly ask everyone to contact their respective county clerks for assistance. Now, once you've received your vote by mail ballot, please take the opportunity to read the instructions carefully. There are 4 simple words: vote, sign, seal, and return. And for me, you do not need to wait until Election Day to return your ballot. In fact, I really believe that if you know who you're voting for, vote, sign, seal, and return it as early as you can. Now, voters will be able to return their ballot again at least 10 secure ballot drop boxes posted throughout each New Jersey county. My website, elections.nj.gov, will have updated listings of the ballot drop box locations. Voters can also choose to return their ballots on Election Day at their assigned polling locations. And again, there will be at least 1 available polling location in every municipality, and each county is expected to maintain 50% of polling locations for disabled voters and those who want to vote in person. Finally, if there becomes an issue with your signature on your vote by mail ballot, maybe you forgot to sign the interior envelope or it doesn't match what you wrote, let's say 10 or even 20 years ago when you first registered to vote, your County Board of Elections will contact you so that you can verify that you are who you say you are and you like your vote to count.
Wonderful, thank you. That is essential information. And I, for one, am excited that there is that option to do mail-in. And hopefully, as Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman stated, that we're all going to be actively registering to vote voting, and we will not allow any suppression efforts. So I want to now turn to Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. So less than 2 years ago, you ran a campaign that resulted in your being elected to represent the 11th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. So during that experience, what insights did you gain about the impact of women voting and women's community organizing on elections? And how did those efforts affect your decision to run for elected office?
That is a great question, and thanks so much. This is such a wonderful panel. It's an honor to be on it. I just want to thank Sarah and Marcia for setting all this up, and Council President Crump, who has really been an inspiration to me for really putting this on. And then it's great to see Secretary Way, another NJ11 resident. So I'm glad to have you. And Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, yes, we don't get to see each other enough. I've heard your voice a lot on our delegation calls. It's great to see you. And it's so great to see you, Governor Whitman, as well. So it's wonderful to be here. You know, I think women and grassroots organizing was so critically important to flipping the 11th district, to my campaign, and to really turning politics on its head in New Jersey. So I have to admit to you, I was a little surprised and taken aback at some of the difficulties of running as a woman in New Jersey. I know that we have some progressive legislation on the books. We're a Democratic state. So I always thought of us as this kind of progressive state. And yet when it came to women running and being in office, it was an uphill climb, and which just gives me even more respect to Governor Todd Whitman and Bonnie Watson Coleman. I'm not quite sure how you guys did it because I feel like the surge in 2018 was so critical, and the surge of women and grassroots politics was so critically important. And so just to give you a sense of that, I think part of the reason I say that is because I was one of the first people across the country to decide to run in 2018. I'm sorry, in 2017. And I did that because I could see something was going on in my district. There were women organizing in a new and different way. Women that in Carline at my school, I might have mentioned, you know, talking about Us Weekly or something. Suddenly they're tracking every single vote that was going on in Congress and are having deep political discussions, not simply, oh, who did you vote for, but discussions about committee hearings and what was going on down in Washington in a new and different way, which kind of caught my eye and my ear. And then there were women organizing meetings just to say, you know, we're going to talk about all of the government officials in your town, freeholders and mayors and council people, and what they do and how they can help you. And in Montclair, we had about 300 people attend that. Just a simple meeting because people were so thirsty to get involved and to get engaged. And that was led by women. And so I went to run, and I went to Emily's list because you do sort of, you know, when you're in Democratic politics and you want to run. And I was talking to them about this and what was kind of going on. And I got the impression that I'm sure a lot of candidates do when you say, this is really special. My district's really special and there's something really amazing going on in the 11th district. I started to get this feeling that maybe they'd heard that from other candidates. And maybe they'd heard that a little bit before. And I started to get the impression that they weren't quite with me on this one. So finally, I put them on the phone with some women in my district. And that phone call, the minute I got off there, the whole tone and tenor had changed. They said, you know, you could tell they're like, whoa, 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 we need to, whoa, wow, something's really going on there. You know, just speaking to these powerful women in my district. And then fast forward a couple months and we'd had a good campaign, we'd been running. And then I go down to Washington and someone said to me, oh, that's funny. Who said you can't run a woman in New Jersey? And I thought, what? Who did say that? I'd like to talk to them. But it was, you know, it wasn't an easy thing, which as many of you know, Alice Paul is from New Jersey. And here we fought so hard to you know, she fought so hard for women's suffrage, one of the first fighters. And we just hadn't really come as far as, quite frankly, we should have. In fact, before Congresswoman Coleman was in her seat, there weren't any women in the delegation. Governor Christie Todd Whitman, it's, you know, it's wonderful. We've had her as a governor, but we haven't had any women since. So I think we've just, in the governorship, so we really just got to continue this organizing. But I'll tell you, I don't think women are going anywhere. And just to kind of give you a sense of the change between the two midterms, in our 2014 midterm in the 11th district, 90,000, a little over 90,000 women came out. In 2018, over 176,000 women came out. In 2014, between 18 and 25-year-old women. In 2014, a little over 1,000 18 to 25-year-old women came out. In 2018, over 19,500 18 to 24-year-old women, 25-year-old women came out in the 11th district. So we are just seeing the surge, and I think it's just across the age groups, and it's been so critically important. And I'll just leave you with this. Something that I think really, when I say it flipped the paradigm on its head, I don't think in 2018, many of us across the country, and we saw, you know, we've seen the largest, the Congress poll of the largest number of women yet. I don't think we were running in spite of being women. I think for the very first time in maybe our nation's history, we were running proudly because we were women, because we knew, and we could communicate that to the country and say, yeah, you know, I'm a mom and I've got 4 kids and this is what's motivating me and getting me out of bed in the morning and why I'm fighting so hard for our future. So I think it was a critical movement, but thanks so much.
Wow. Well, that sounds like an incredible journey and one that we all have incredible admiration for. And I can certainly vouch for the issue of trying to get more college students, men and females and males, women and men, voting more. And it's something that I know when I was a college student, I will admit I didn't vote in every election, and trying to change that for the next generation. So it is, but when they vote, boy, do they make a difference. And now I want to turn to Governor Todd Whitman. And in addition to my question, I'd love to also hear any input you have with regard to Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill's discussion on the experiences of being a woman running in New Jersey, and in your case, governing New Jersey as a trailblazer in the state. So as an expert on energy and environmental issues, can you tell our audience how these issues disparately impact women today and how that connects to voting? In other words, are there particular environmental problems that would be or are resolved differently due to women voting? And again, in addition to that question, we'd also love to hear your experiences as a woman running for office in New Jersey and governing New Jersey.
It's not so much, well, first of all, again, thank you all to put this together and who are hosting tonight. It's a great time to have this panel and an important discussion to have. There isn't an environmental issue that affects just women. It affects everyone. But where we do see a big discrepancy is in areas of people of color and in the poorer areas. That's where you get a disproportionate negative environmental impact, because that's where they didn't have the voice. They weren't voting, they didn't have the ability, and they didn't have the power to be able to stop some of these things coming into their community. So they tended to be where you found some of the Superfund sites, where you found factories that were setting up that were emitting things, the methane and CO2. And so that's where you really have a difference in the impact. But I will say that women are they're more and more concerned about their children. And women tend to care a lot about children. Now, we don't know what causes asthma, but we do know what can trigger an attack or what can exacerbate it. And that's PM 2.5, which is the fine particulate matter that we have in the air from our factory legacy, from what's going on from cars on the road. In fact, we're rolling back our regulations to protect us. And that takes kids out of school. Of course, now school is a whole different thing. So it's a bit of a different question, except that it's frightening when the child can't breathe. It's frightening for anyone when they can't breathe. So women tend to be more concerned about the health impacts from a dirty environment. And I think that we'll see in this election cycle, I'm very much hoping that we will see more women engaged because of these issues and demanding that those who are seeking to be their representatives actually address the issues. Where are we going to get our energy? Are we investing in the new technologies and the green environment, the renewables? Are we doing everything we can to try to help clean up our environment in spite of what this administration has done? As for what happened with Mikey, I agree. I mean, I certainly benefited from women when I ran one of the biggest rallies, and I know there are a couple of other panelists, I won't out you, and people who appeared and were not on the panel but gave opening remarks, who remember some of those women's rallies that we had, and some of the things we did afterward with and for women, because it's important to have a disparate group of people at the decision-making table. And that's where women need to step up and understand we have a right to be there. There's a need for us to be there. And there's a need for people of different backgrounds, different races, different life experiences, because that's what will give us the answers that we need to the problems that we face today.
Thank you. Well, I'm inspired. I hope if there's one thing that comes out of this event is that we have women in the audience who decide to run for elected office. You can do it. Okay, I want to move on to the next theme, which is how race and class intersect in women's activism, past and present. And I'll start with a question for Secretary Tahisha Way. So as someone with an extensive record of leadership such as yourself, in your opinion, how does a woman's racial identity affect her experience? How has your identity as a Black woman shaped your engagement on women's issues, women's rights issues, and what advice do you have for racial minority women seeking to be political leaders in the future, whether elected leaders or appointed leaders? I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm hoping I'm still with you. A storm is coming through fiercely. But I just want to say that for me, no matter who you are, one's identity shapes your experience. I know as a Black woman through my life, I have frequently been the only Black woman or even the only Black person in the room. Today, I serve as the only Black Secretary of State who oversees elections nationally. I imagine that just every African-American woman in America probably has a story about an assumption or stereotype expressed by, you know, those around her in her professional space. I recall at times as a young attorney, I wasn't immediately acknowledged as the lawyer in the case. And of course, I even noticed as a state administrative law judge, when I would walk into the proceeding and, you know, oftentimes someone would give me a look that read, I didn't expect it to be you in those judges' robes. So for me personally, it has made me conscious of the fact that my very presence can somewhat weaken the stereotypes. After all, it doesn't matter that I don't look, you know, a specific way, but it just matters that where I am, I show who I am and my ultimate identity. I want to also say that it has fueled in me a desire really to provide for young Black women and even just young people in general, for gender, no matter their gender or their race, more than what we have had access to. I know growing up, I remember learning a bit about the women's suffrage movement in school, but I don't recall hearing about individuals such as Ida B. Wells, who decided at one of the first women's marches in DC to not march at the end of the line with the Black suffragists, but to join in with the white suffragists. I understand that Native American women, Hispanic women, other minority women fought for the right to vote after the 19th Amendment was ushered in. And just to be a bit personal, you know, just learning about African-American, historic African-American organizations, like my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, that I know Congressman Bonnie Watson Coleman knows so well, who also dedicated themselves to voter registration and still does that today. So as we recognize the centennial of the 19th Amendment, I'm proud that I'm in a position here in New Jersey to make sure that we are sharing the history, the entire history and impact for all women. And in terms of advice for young women looking to be governmental leaders, it would be about the importance of using their inner power to pay it forward. So whenever you get the chance to have a say, make sure that you aren't the only woman or the only minority person in the room, but also no matter who you are and what your identity is, if you are in a leadership position, gather others around you who are different than you, who have different experiences. The one thing that I feel is a true asset to our existence is the diverse perspectives we can all bring to conversations.
Thank you. Well, that is actually the perfect segue into my next question for Governor Christine Todd Whitman. So our nation is currently reckoning with a long history of anti-Black racism, as evinced by the massive protests across the country protesting the murder of Black men and Black women, particularly by police officers. So based on your extensive experience as an elected official and former federal appointee, how do you think women of different races and ethnicities can collaborate to ensure everyone receives the same privileges and benefits in their dealings with local, state, and federal government? So in other words, how can we ensure that women's movements are not exclusionary based on race, ethnicity, or class?
Well, the first thing we have to do is make the effort to look around us and see who is with us and reach out. If we don't see the kind of diversity that we want, then we've got to make it happen. It does take some proactive effort. It doesn't all come together automatically. We've got to work at it. But as I said before, we need to get over this idea. Women tend to be a little more laid back, a little more reluctant to get into the fray because we always seem to think, oh, there's someone who knows more about this than I do, or there's somebody who'd be better at it than I would. And I used to say, well, I still do say, that if you asked a man to do something about which they knew absolutely nothing, they'd say, fine, bring it on. You ask a woman to do it and they go, well, wait a minute, let me see if I think I'm the right person. Get over it. We have our different life experiences, our different ways of approaching problems is every bit as important. And we can learn on the job as well as anybody in the world. But the important thing, because it's right, what the Secretary of State was saying is right. When we learned about the women's movement, when I learned about the women's movement, Black faces weren't there. And yet they were incredibly important very early on at the very beginning of the women's movement. And we do face a racism in this country today that we've got to address. I just finished a book called Deep Delta Justice that I would recommend to anyone. It's not it's a history book. I mean, it's true, but it's about racism and the right to vote and everything in a parish in Louisiana in the 60s during the whole movement in the 60s. And it's frightening to me to read that book and see the parallels that I see occurring today. So it becomes increasingly important that we make sure as women that we support other women, that we look for the diversity that is so necessary, understanding that again is what is going to take to find the solutions to the incredibly difficult and complex problems we face today. There's no one group that has all the answers. Not all white men, they don't have all the answers. Not all women have all the answers, but we do a lot better job than a lot of the guys. And in fact, if you look at with the expression, what's going on around the world in COVID, with addressing the COVID issue, it's the countries run by women that have done the better job.
Yes, we all did notice that those headlines. And your point is very well taken, especially by an educator like myself, because I think part of the job of what we do at Rutgers University, Newark, is to try to really ensure that our students are able to collaborate across race, across ethnicity, across class. And I will just put one important point that we all know, which is really something that I think troubles all of us, which is the de facto segregation of our society. And it's something that hopefully we can address.
I had a motto for the state of New Jersey when I was governor, and I had pins made up. It said, many faces, one family, because it's that diversity that gives us our texture and our strength. And it was important to me.
Yeah. So I'd like to now turn to Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. And so as the first Black woman to serve as majority leader in the New Jersey General Assembly and chair of the New Jersey Democratic State Committee, you have broken many a glass ceiling, if not brick walls, in your career, something that, you know, many of us who come behind you are in admiration of, because we know it's not easy. Can you tell us about an experience when your status as a Black woman, not just a woman, but a Black woman, created a particularly unique challenge in your career, and how you overcame such a challenge, and what advice you have for women of color who want to seek a political office?
Wow, okay. So first thing, let me say to Black women and women, but particularly Black women who may be interested in becoming part of what we do, but question whether or not they're ready, because we suffer from, and the governor mentioned it, but she didn't call it what I know it to be, the so-called imposter's theory. Thinking that we're just, you know, someone's going to find out that we're not as smart as we appear, and that we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, when in fact we are as smart and probably much more diligent about getting it right. So as an African-American woman, my whole life experience has been being reacted to in high school in that way, and not being acknowledged for the achievement that I made, or running into an obstacle or being directed to do something differently. It was as a young professional in state government and not getting a promotion that I was entitled to. In one instance, because I was a woman, in another instance, you know, perhaps because I'm Black. As an elected official, as the chair of the party or even the majority leader, there were times when people forgot to invite me to the meeting I should have been at, you know, and would have been there had I been a white man, you know. One of the most hurtful experiences I had as an elected official, I was sequestered during the reapportionment, and my son and my stepson got into trouble, and they had to come find me at the hotel that I could not leave to tell me. And so they had a brush with the law. And when we went to court, even after the prosecutor and the defense attorneys agreed to something, this judge made this pronouncement from his from his desk that because my sons were children of privilege, that he said, you know, and prominence, that those things that they did should be treated as very, very serious, because they should have known better. And so he gave them a sentence that was 3 years longer than the sentence that was agreed upon between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. And this judge had a reputation for being a racist. And so my sons, I thought, were punished because of me. And because of who I was, both Black, both female, and in the political world, this was an opportunity to show me that you're still what I think you are. And so when the other two children, young people, one young person who didn't come from sort of a family of quote unquote prominence or whatever, came from a very poor family, came before the judge, he gave them the very same sentence. And this is because that these children were African American, but this was because I was an African American. When my sons got into trouble, I was the face on the Trentonian paper. That's the only time I've had the first page, full page, cover page picture of me. And so those sort of things that try to undermine your sense of confidence and your sense of purpose and cause you to be to be distracted from what you think you're supposed to be doing while you're there doing what you're doing. Those things happen to you when you're African American, when you're Black in America, and they've happened to you if you're brown in America. And they have happened to women in the issue of violence in the home, where they paid consequences for just trying to protect themselves. And so those are experiences that we have, and that's why it's so vitally important that women are elected to positions and women are appointed to positions where policies are made, where laws are passed, and where wrongs are righted. You asked Tahisha about identity, her identity and how it impacts what she does. And I immediately thought of this. Christie Todd Whitman was not my governor for my party. She was my governor, but not for my party. But she had so many women in these high-level positions. And that's the first time we experienced that. And she did that because that's who she is, and she had confidence in bringing people to the forefront to handle these important things. When I do things that I think are important to my community, whether or not it's environmental justice issues or housing issues or ending poverty or social justice issues or, you know, economic issues. I bring it out of who I am. And it's not just that I'm like a good person and I'm going to care about some other people that I'm not, but even though I do, and I hope that I am, it's out of who I am. My identity informs the things that I do, the things that I take on, and the positions that I take. So I say that to say, being Black and being female, it presents very unique issues, and that's why we did the Congressional Caucus on Black women and girls, because that intersection of gender and race is something that hasn't really been examined and addressed the way it had needed to be. I think it's much more now. I think we're all a little bit more woke now. I think that we recognize that there is a sharing of experiences, of challenges, of burdens, and of opportunities that exist among all women if we kind of stick together and recognize that we're there for purpose and not for power. And so, do we have to do it even though it's not easy to do, even though we might find ourselves in a challenging situation because we are Black, we are Latinx, we're HGT, HGTV, we're LGBTQ, whatever we are. It's all right. We bring something that's of value to the enterprise.
And thank you so much for sharing that personal story, because I think that's really important, is that we all hear our stories and be able to see the world or experience the world through other people's experiences. I know as an Arab Muslim woman, in the post 9/11 era, there are so many things that have happened to me, my family, my friends, that when I tell people who don't belong to those communities, they're just shocked that that could happen in the United States. And people have different experiences based on their identity or perceived identity. So thank you so much for sharing that story, and thank you for—
That's not something I generally talk about, but that's something that I think I uniquely experienced because I was Black and in that space.
Right. I think it's important. So I want to, before we move on to the final theme, I just want to ask Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill a question. How on this theme of the intersection of race and class and gender, how has your experiences as a woman in the military affected your perspectives on women's rights? You were a helicopter pilot, and I don't think that most, the stereotype of a helicopter pilot is male. If you ask people, what do you think of? What's the image that comes into your mind in terms of implicit biases? And so I can just imagine the different types of challenges you may have faced within the military. So what do you think should be the top priorities for women as a group today? And how do these priorities vary based on a person's class or race or positionality in a non-traditional professional role? Non-traditional meaning it's not where a lot of women tend to be working in.
That's a great question. I do think, as Congresswoman Watson Coleman said, so much of what we are and what we bring to the table is based on our experiences. And I couldn't help but think, and this is going to be a little cheesy, but you asked me a Navy question, so I'm going to give you one of the Navy phrases. I couldn't help but think, Bonnie, when you were talking, something that was always said at the Naval Academy, that the hotter the fire, the stronger the blade. And I can't help but think that you and Tahisha and Governor Todd Whitman, these experiences, these struggles really do make you more empathetic. They make you more ready to fight for your values and really hone those values. So Naval Academy and my experience in the Navy, issues of gender were there from the start. And when I was in the 5th grade and told my dad I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, he said, "I'm not sure they allow women at the academy." And just to show you how big the world is for young women, in the 5th grade, I said, "Well, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out." Like, that's what we want to nurture in young women, is that attitude. And so, but it was such an eye-opener to get there and to go somewhere where we had all of the midshipmen together in front of the Chief of Naval Operations, and to have a young woman stand up and say, "When are we going to have women on submarines?" And he said in a really snarky voice, "Not in my lifetime," to a standing ovation. When you would have, you would be told that we don't need more women leaders, we don't need more minority leaders, you just follow good leadership. Well, I think all of us who have had to find our way know how much better it is when we have great mentors who've sort of carved the path and can show us the way. It's so much harder when you are, as Secretary Way said, the only woman at the table, the only woman of color at the table. I remember getting on an aircraft carrier, and when the Air Wings deployed, it was 5,500 people on that aircraft carrier, and I was the only woman. I mean, imagine, just trying to find your way in that environment. And so these were the challenges, and yet, as you do something like that, you do, I think, learn deeply about yourself and about what you need to do to make sure you're the mentor that you would have liked to see in front of you, and you're mentoring those young women. And so now, the good news is when I graduated the Academy, it was the first class of women who graduated into when many of the roles for combat had been opened up for women. And I don't think it's an accident that all those years ago, opening up those combat roles and having women compete for jobs in the Navy on equal footing, I don't think it's an accident that today you see in this recent class 2 Naval Academy women, myself and Elaine Luria, enter into the 116th Congress. I think treating women and allowing women to have a seat at the table, as we keep saying, is so important. And what does that mean in Congress? How does that look in Congress? Well, I'll tell you, I sit on the House Armed Services Committee. And Jackie Spear, a congresswoman who's been fighting hard for women's rights in the services, presented a bill saying that we should have a special prosecutor to look at the really alarming rates of sexual assault and harassment at our service academies. And one of the gentlemen in opposition to the bill said we should have a study. Well, we've spent millions of dollars and had studies since I entered the Naval Academy 30 years ago, and the numbers today don't look that much different. If anything, they might be slightly worse. So I have to tell you that I did not think that was a very good answer. And I spoke strongly on it because I send women to the academies. And so I feel very strongly that I'm responsible for many of them. And I'm responsible as a member of Congress to make sure that being harassed or assaulted is never the price you pay for serving your country. And so I spoke strongly on against what that gentleman had said. And he said condescendingly, and this just, this is today, somewhat condescendingly, I thought, well, we're going to hear a lot of emotional stories, which I think so many women, it's sort of code for, sort of verbally patting someone on the head and saying, there you go, stay in your lane. And yet what's different now is that story resonated. I had Elaine Luria at my side who spoke strongly on it as well. And wouldn't you know that 7 people crossed over and voted on our amendment more than for any other amendment in that hearing. So that's what having women at the table looks like in practice. And that's why I think it's so critically important. And that's what we've got to continue to fight for, because as I think Governor Todd Whitman has said so eloquently, it's about a diverse group at the table. Well, I think some of us have pretty strong feelings about what women are good at and how important they are. There are areas where we need other points of view. And we don't just need women, we need women of color, and we need men of color, and we need people from the Northeast and the Midwest and the Far West. I mean, we need this diverse array, which has always made our country so strong. And I think that's what we all have to have as a priority is as this group, getting more women, a more diverse group of women at the table. We did so well in 2018, but I'm just going to leave everyone with a cautionary tale because I want you to keep fighting. When I was running for Congress, I had a woman I was getting very excited about women running, and she said, well, Mikey, this isn't the first year of the woman. And I don't think we built on the last one like we needed to. So let's keep up that fight. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we only have about 8 minutes left. So what I will do is I will ask a question and then just ask each panelist to answer the same question, and you can build off of the prior comments or not. So the third theme, which is something that I've struggled with a lot, and I think anyone who does activism or is a reformist or is engaged politically is always struggling with, which is being what we call an insider change agent or an outsider change agent. Do you fix the system from within or do you fix the system from without? And that's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I think we all go through different phases in our life If I had to generalize, I would say that perhaps when you're younger, you tend to be more of an external change agent, going out there and protesting, pressuring the establishment, writing op-eds and really being very critical. And then perhaps if, as you get older, you may start going within the system and then making or attempting to make the changes from the inside. But it's just this constant tension, and sometimes mutually exclusive. But it's something that I think, especially young people, need to always be thinking about is, do you want to be on the inside making change or on the outside? I personally think it's very hard to do both at the same time, though it's fine to do it, at different phases in your life. And so we wanted to get your advice, because I suspect all of you at some point have been outsiders. And one could argue that right now you're technically insiders, depending on inside of what, right? Inside of Congress, or inside of the New Jersey government, or etc. So what advice do you have for women who want to be change agents in their communities, whether it's local, state, or national, especially with regard to what are the pros and cons of being an insider change agent or an outsider change agent? How can these young women think through what is the best role for me, and how does perhaps one's phase in life or professional career affect that thinking? So I'll start with Governor Christine Todd Whitman. What advice do you have for our audience, and particularly young women as they're looking for their path for being change agents?
First thing I'd say is go for it. Know what your passion is, know what you think is important, and then you decide what's comfortable for you. I mean, there are some people who thrive on demonstrations, on writing those letters, on appearing at council meetings, because a lot of the change is local. It doesn't always have to be at the federal level. In fact, most of it does happen at the local and state that most immediately affects people. So decide on those issues and then see where you're comfortable. And I agree with you, it'll be at a different age and stage in life. It depends on, if you're in the middle of just starting a career, do you have time to take off? Or is this going to hurt you in some way if you are visibly out there demonstrating? If you think it'll hurt your career, and if it means that your career means that much to you, then you have to think it through a little bit. But if you decide, no, I'm sorry, this issue is so important that I want to be out there on the front lines, then go for it. And if someone has a problem with that, like so many things, and I think for women particularly, when you get put in a place or a stereotype because you are a woman, at least one of the things that I always did was I figured, well, that's their problem, not mine, because I'm not changing my sex. I am what I am. And if that's a problem for you, I'm sorry, but we're going to go ahead and do whatever it is we're doing. But it's definitely going to be, you have to find where you're comfortable. If you're comfortable running for office, we need more women. We need people at all levels of government, women at all levels of government, people of color at all levels of government. So go for that. But if that's not where you're comfortable, then you know what? Writing op-eds, writing to your legislators, getting on the phone. Most important thing, though, is voting. That's something we all can do. There's absolutely no reason not to, and we have got to exercise that franchise.
Excellent. Secretary Tahisha Way, what are your thoughts on that insider-outsider question?
Yes, Sahar, I want to first echo exactly what our esteemed governor has said. First and foremost, to be any sort of change agent, you have to vote. This is your voice in our democracy, but we also have to realize that voting is the floor and not the ceiling when it comes to our responsibilities to one another and, of course, to civic engagement. Just thinking about this question, I also think about the words my mother would tell me growing up, 2 simple words to somehow ensure that I was engaged, communitarian in a community way. She would always just say to me, Tahisha, be present. And with those words, that is just saying to whomever to show up for something and to know why you're there, to be willing to learn, to be observant, to hear other people when they are speaking and try to understand their perspective. And of course, to know your value and know what you have to contribute to is of paramount importance. I remember when I started college in Rhode Island, and the one thing that I witnessed as a freshman was that there were organizations that were attuned to social concerns, but I saw that there really wasn't an organization which truly dug deep into the issues and the concerns which affected African-American students on campus. So that's when I got together with other students, other of my colleagues, and we started and founded our university's first chapter of the NAACP, being the quote unquote outsiders to somewhat affect change. So when you couple all of these variables, these principles together, I just feel that we all have that inner ability to serve as the change agents, which our communities so very much need.
That's excellent. Now that's definitely some change agency, and you've left a legacy. So Congressman Mikey Sherrill, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of being a change agent within the system and outside the system, and how to think through it over a lifetime of being a change agent in terms of when it's best to be in that role versus a different role?
Well, it's such an interesting question because I think so many women in the 11th district have a very near experience of going from one side to the other. And so, you know, I was coming from the outside, or at the outside. No one really thought my district was winnable. I had a lot of advice, you know, that it was nice to do this for my country, but don't really count on it. And yet, you know, we had all the grassroots movement. We had the outside groups really advocating for change, and they weren't within our political system. They weren't people that had a seat at the table. And yet I think because we presented such a powerful force in the district, people took notice. And so then many of us moved to the inside. I got into Congress. Sailia Valenda leads our Democratic Party. We have other women that have run for town council and gotten into our councils. So, you know, we have this mix of people who've sort of started on the outside, and many have now moved into the inside. And I think what's so critical is to understand how we can all work together, because to really make change, you have to bring the community together, which takes all your outside groups, which deeply understand the issues in each community. And then you need an insider. You need somebody that can really get the legislation passed, or change the party in a specific way, or ensure that we have good voting rights. And so I would say I have been different things throughout my life, but I would also suggest that the more women we have on the inside right now, it's critically important. We just have too few women that have been able to be that insider, to understand the dense politics of our legislature, or to understand how you advocate for your district best. And it makes a big difference. As we heard, the governor had women on her staff. You know, that's another thing. You just see a lot of people gravitate towards people that they're comfortable with. And so many of the women on the Hill, I think, have come there because of female congresswomen. So I do think the inside track for getting stuff done, it's important we see more women there. Although we have such great grassroots groups that we need that outside track too. But I think you gotta find your passion.
From protest to power, right? That's a common saying. So Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, I want to give you the last word on this issue before we move to the Q&A from the audience. We have a lot of really interesting questions, and the audience is very engaged. So what are your views on this issue?
So I've spent my entire life in public service. I guess that means I'm an insider. So I would be the jelly maker, not necessarily the tree shaker, which is somebody who's generally outside agitating. And I think that both are very important for the reasons that Mikey stated. You need the people on the outside just protesting and bringing the activism around the issues, creating the tension that's necessary to get things done. Then you need somebody who's going to execute, and those are the insiders. And so my whole life has been sort of on the inside, but I've been particularly taken by what I've seen on the outside. Starting with the Parkland students and their protests and the young age and the sophistication and the depth of knowledge and the courage and the organization that took place. Though obviously the Women's March in January 2017, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Movement, you know, all of those are very important. And those of us who are on the inside need that on the outside to get the kind of change that we need, because elected officials respond to what their constituents are demanding. So what you want to do specifically is a personal issue. I was in the executive branch of government for 28 years. I even served under Governor Whitman. Governor, you were my governor. I said that inartfully. I meant we came from different parties, but you were definitely my governor, and I'm proud of you. But I never wanted to be an elected official, because that takes an entirely different sort of a mentality. You put yourself in very uncomfortable positions. As a woman on the inside, we were always helping somebody else. I was working in affirmative action, and civil rights, equal opportunity, rooming homes, dealing with issues for other people. When you're elected official, you're going out there asking somebody, would you contribute to my campaign? Would you support me and give me your vote? That's a whole different mindset. So, and I'll tell you, I was not comfortable with it, and not that comfortable even to this day to ask someone to support me on at least financially. But you got to do it, because we need more women in those positions. We need more governors. We need more people in the state legislatures. We need more women in both houses of Congress, particularly the Senate. And then we need a whole lot of women in the executive branch of government, because I honestly believe that women generally serve in positions out of a purpose, a sense of purpose and a need and a response to a concern that they see, much more so than just because they want to be powerful and have a title. And God knows that, you know, we need more compassionate, understanding, a willingness to work together, and smart people making decisions. And the women I encounter in government, both in the elected and in the executive and in the judiciary, they're pretty darn smart to get there.
Yes, thank you for that. Amen. I can tell you, even in universities, you know, when you get appointed chair as a woman, you're not thinking, oh, this is going to give me a lot of power. You're thinking, oh, this is going to be a lot of work.
A lot of work.
And it is a lot of work, and it's worth it. But no, I can relate. Well, this has been phenomenal, and I can tell by the large number of questions. So I'm going to curate a bit from our audience. And one question we had was primarily for the Congresswomen, so Congresswoman Coleman and Congresswoman Cheryl, is how do women in Congress from different racial groups intersect? And the person who asked the question is also interested in incorporating the Latinx experience. And so whether it's how do you within your own, whether it's through caucuses or more informal means, but how do the different women in Congress intersect with each other and find common ground, whether it's across a party line or not? So Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, do you want to start?
You know, we come together in so many different ways. So Congressman Watson Coleman and I come together probably too frequently in our delegation calls. They're a little raucous. I actually have to tell everyone that it's a delight to hear Congresswoman Watson Coleman run herd on our kind of very outspoken delegation and get everyone in order and focused on the problem. I always enjoy that. But we come together in that way in issues of our district. We are in the Northeast Regional Recovery Task Force together. And so we have that relationship. There's women on the House Armed Services Committee. Lori Trahan and Veronica Escobar are part of our Latinx community, and they've been so, and just speaking again of how critical this diversity is. When Vanessa Guillen was murdered, I think their voices were so powerful to speak, not just from the House Armed Services Committee perspective, but from how this impacted the Latin community, the Latinx community. And so we interact that way, and I think we came together as women from the Latinx community, and then Elaine and I were from the veterans community. So we worked on several issues together related to Vanessa Guillen's murder. And then we come together, it just, I think as moms, like I know Debbie Murcaso Powell has young children, Lori Trahan has young school-age children, as do I. We're all in a text chain, sort of wondering how the heck we're going to go back into session in September when all our schools are closed. We're going to figure that out, and we're going to really work hard to get the nation's children in childcare. So these are all the ways I think we cross over and have some really important, powerful conversations.
Okay, Congressman Bonnie Watson Coleman.
Well, we've got enough caucuses. We've got the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Caucus, the LGBTQ Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Veterans Caucus. I mean, we come together, different women in different caucuses. And we got the caucus on Black women and girls. We got a caucus for everything. So, we encounter women, each one another, in these different caucuses. And then we have there's a natural gravity that exists, because I think everyone is sort of stunned by how many women are in Congress right now. So we have a tendency to exchange pleasantries among one another. We feel comfortable reaching out to one of the other colleagues that we may not know, just to see if you have an interest around an issue. And so there are a lot of opportunities depending upon just how active you are in the various caucuses. And then we do things like, in addition to our delegation meeting, which is at least once a week, which is very interesting, we do colleague letters. So we reach out to different colleagues to see if you're interested in supporting this particular issue. We seek co-sponsors of legislation. So we don't have a lot of time to just kind of like hang out. We hang out around issues, around an event, around the time that we had to protest on the House floor with the great late John Lewis, where we encountered women that we didn't necessarily know. So there are opportunities for, and I think that there's this thing. I think that we know instinctively or intuitively that we're there for one another. And that there's enough of us there to be there for one another.
That's great. Yeah. Critical mass is really important. A cluster.
Yeah.
So we have a number of questions for Secretary Tahisha Way. So I am going to ask a few of them. They're somewhat related, so you might want to get a pen out, Secretary Way, and some of them are questions you probably anticipate. The first is, if we can vote safely on the poll, at the polls on November 3rd, is that the preferred method in order to have the votes included in the count that night? Can you please repeat the website to find the places to drop off the ballots? Are we able to leave mail-in ballots at the polling sites? And could you please repeat the email address where you can access the location of ballot drop boxes?
Okay, thank you, Seth. I might be a bit out of turn. First, our elections website is elections.nj.gov. Yes, for this election, you can return a vote by mail ballot at a select polling location, and everyone will have the information on our website as to their polling locations. The one thing that I have to say, and this goes to your first question, And I think I said this earlier in terms of the conduct of the election. Look, we're living through a historic pandemic. We want to ensure, and hats off to our governor, and of course, moving democracy forward, but at the same time, ensuring and protecting the health and the safety of our voters. So if you are that registered active voter receiving your vote by mail ballot, please vote as soon as you realize who you want to and what you want to vote for. Do not sit on your ballot. We're also increasing the number of ballot boxes, which are secure. They're under surveillance. There's the chain of custody to take the ballots from the drop boxes to the respective counties' offices that you can also go to. Don't make voting a last minute decision otherwise. I really want to underscore this. So yes, you can return at a polling place, but there are other options for voters to safely and securely cast their ballot.
Okay, great. So I would love to ask at least 5 more questions because there are so many great questions, but it is already almost 8:20. And so we have run out of time, which I anticipated. We could probably go for another 2 hours. And I wish I could invite all of you, and I will invite all of you to Rutgers Law School in Newark when everything is settled, we get a vaccine and we get this pandemic under control. So that is an open invitation. But alas, I must close out the session and introduce my wonderful colleague and very good friend, Marsha Brown, who serves as the president of Women at NJPAC, who, as you know, is the major sponsor of this timely and important event. And she's also the vice chancellor for external relations and governmental affairs. And I would be remiss if I didn't put in just a personal plug for her. I am a deep admirer of Marsha. She every time I'm around her, I get energized. So we are so lucky to have her at Rutgers Newark, and we're very fortunate to have her here today. And so I will pass the mic, figuratively speaking, to Marsha Brown.
Well, thank you, Sahar. And I want to say amen, amen, amen. As we close out this program, I have to thank you, phenomenal women, for coming on and speaking as deeply and as emotionally and with the experiences that you guys are sharing. The conversation has been amazing. You have offered so much wisdom and advice and guidance to the people who've been on this line. And we've had over 1,200 people registered for this event. And that tells you something about the power that you all bring to this space. So I want to thank you. Thank our sponsors, NJPAC, the Women at NJPAC, and all of our partners who joined with us today to bring this program. Sarah and I are just amazed at how many people signed up. I want you to know that we believe all of you, the 1,200 people who registered, you are the warriors of this generation. And we think that you have to be as fierce as Shirley Chisholm was in the 70s when she said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, then bring a folding chair. And she had the audacity to run for president. So many of you have asked on the chat whether this event was recorded. Yes, it was, and it will be posted on the NJPAC website. We also want to encourage you, because this campaign has to continue, right? We're in a battle, we're in a struggle for a campaign for justice, for voting equality, and for better leadership. So we want to encourage people to attend events that are coming up. The New Jersey Historical Commission on Wednesday has a Women's Equality Day virtual panel. That's August 26th. That information will be on our website. And NJPAC is holding next Monday night the PSCG True Diversity Film Series, which features a very important panel discussion about Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. So we know we're going to get into some difficult conversation and discourse, and that's okay. We have to be willing to shine a light on these issues, and also talk about why having allies is a key component of the fight against racism. So finally, I just want to say, be revolutionary and register to vote. Bring others to register and then vote. And by the way, my colleague Sahar is running for office in the city of Westville. So all of you who are on the line from Westville, vote for Sahar. And in the struggle for democracy and to bring the leadership we need, it truly is a revolutionary act to vote. So listen, power to the people. Everyone stay safe, healthy, and stay lifted. Good night.